Greetings and welcome to BeIndie.biz. My name is Alan Thorn and this is the second part of our Infinite Runner tutorial. Over this tutorial series, we'll be looking at how to create an Infinite Runner game from start to end. This complete course is available free of charge from our YouTube channel BeIndie.biz. Don't forget to subscribe and to check out our video tutorials on creating exciting games. We're going to be taking a look in this course at how to make an infinite runner game in which you have to move a character left or right to avoid obstacles and see how long you survive. In this part of the course, we're going to be looking at level design, how to import modular assets and configure those in the level to build an interesting game world. We're going to check out issues such as lighting and the lighting tab and configuring lighting settings. All of these are critically important for building interesting levels, so be sure you get all of these concepts nailed down thoroughly because you're going to be using them in pretty much any game you create. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, so now it's time for a really fun part of game development. This is where we get to build up a level and start to see the environment take shape and come to life. I'm going to start by referring to the assets that we imported in the preceding video. These are the environment assets. You can find these in the project panel under Assets, Barking Dog for some reason, and inside Barking Dog we have 3D Free Modular Kit, and then the prefabs folder, which contains the different environment pieces. And the idea is to combine and recombine these to fit together like Lego bricks to build up the environment that we want to create. So for example, you can see that here we have floor 01. Now I'm definitely going to be using that because our environment needs a floor. And when we look at the names here, we've pretty much got two choices, floor 01 or floor small 01. I'm going to be using floor 01, so I'm going to drag and drop that into the scene to begin placing our floor. Now I'm going to start by positioning this floor piece to the world origin, so move to the transform component and type 000 to move that to the world origin. Now one thing that this object hasn't made clear to us, and I do need to point out, if I move to the object inspector, you'll see under the static checkbox that this is enabled by default for this particular object. Now that is exactly what we want, but I just want to make clear what that checkbox means. If you put a tick in that box, you are telling Unity that this object never moves. So this floor during gameplay, it's always going to be stuck at that position. All the walls, the ceilings, the floors, all of that stuff is going to be fixed in place so we can safely mark that as static. But objects like the player character or NPCs, they should never be marked as static because they have the potential to move around. Okay, great. So we've positioned the floor piece inside the level. Now let's find a wall piece. So I'm going to move down here. Now we have several different options for this. We have these arc versions and half arc versions, and these are great for corner sections of the wall. You can see in the case here, this one turns inwards and this one turns outwards. But I don't really want a corner section. I want to focus on a straight section. And for that, I'm going to use the simple version here. So I'm going to drag and drop that into the scene. So there we have our wall piece. Now I need to position a ceiling piece. The ceiling piece is going to attach to the top of this piece here. So I'm going to find the ceiling. And actually the naming convention here is for roof. I'm going to take a look at roof 01. And that's looking pretty good. You can see that is a straight section. We have the top part where it meets the wall and then curves over to the ceiling. So I'm going to drag and drop that into the scene. Perfect. This is now positioned in the scene. Now the really awkward thing about these different elements here is that we've got a floor piece here, a wall piece here, and a ceiling piece here, and none of these really match up. Now I could manually begin to position these together. For example, I could grab the wall section simply by clicking on it or selecting it from the hierarchy panel, and then I can use the translate tool, the move tool, to begin to position this wall into piece to match up with the floor. Now, I don't know about you, but this would drive me absolutely crazy because I could never be 100% certain that this lined up perfectly. I mean, I could adjust it slightly further this way. You can see here it kind of lines up. Move it this way a little bit, move it this way a little bit, and eventually you just can't be sure that there isn't going to be a gap somewhere, and that would really just drive me crazy. I wouldn't be able to handle that. Thankfully, Unity provides us with a tool called vertex snapping that allows us to maneuver objects exactly into position, vertex to vertex. Let me show you how that works. So I'm going to select the piece that I want to move. In this case, I want to move this wall piece here. And effectively what I want to do is I want the vertex here, the corner vertex at the edge of the wall, the corner point at the edge of the wall, to line up perfectly with this position here on both the X, Y, and the Z axis. So the way to do that is make sure you select this wall piece here and hold down the V key on the keyboard. V stands for vertex snap. So I'm going to hold down the V key. Now, when I'm holding down the V key on the keyboard and I'm moving the mouse around on that wall piece, you can see that the gizmo here is snapping to all of the different vertices in the mesh. I need to pick the vertex that I want to snap to the corner point here, which is in fact the lower corner point of this mesh. Now that I've found that mesh, I simply have to click and drag my mouse to where I want to put it, which is there. And then release. I can release the key on the keyboard and release the mouse button. And in doing that, I have now perfectly aligned these two mesh pieces. The wall meets the floor perfectly. That's great. Now let's take a look at the ceiling piece here. Now you can see the ceiling piece is over here, and well, actually it's facing in the wrong direction, so I need to rotate that around. When I select this, you can see that its default rotation is 180 degrees around the y-axis. I'm going to put that back to 0 so it faces in the right direction. I now want to hold down the V key on the keyboard, and effectively I want to align the corner vertex of the wall here with the top of this here. So hold down the V key, click and drag to snap it to that location, and now these are perfectly lined up. That is exactly what I want. Now you may notice in the background that Unity is calculating the lighting. You can see from the bottom right hand side that Unity is in fact taking a look at these different geometry elements in the scene, and it's automatically calculating how the lighting should look based on the directional light positioned at that location. If your Unity is not doing that, it means that you have auto generate deactivated. We're going to be coming back to this dialog soon, but I'm just going to show you quickly how you can activate auto generate so that you can see the lighting in the scene rebake just like mine is doing. You want to choose the window menu, and then you want to go to the rendering section and select lighting settings. This will display a lighting dialog. I'm going to dock that into the object inspector. I'm going to click and drag the lighting tab into the object inspector so I can align those settings there. I want to scroll down pretty much all the way to the bottom to the auto generate section. You just want to make sure that there is a check mark inside the auto generate checkbox. That means that as you add and move elements around the scene, Unity is going to automatically calculate the lighting for you. So that's looking pretty good. We've now created a single unit piece. Of course, our level isn't composed from just this piece. We're going to need to begin to duplicate different pieces to maneuver them around the level. Now we've gone ahead and made our first environment piece. This is the wall here, the floor and the ceiling. I need to make more of these basically. So I'm going to select these three objects here by holding the top one, clicking and holding down the shift key and selecting the bottom one. And then with these items selected, on the keyboard I can press Ctrl D or Command D on a Mac to duplicate. I can also move to the menu and choose Edit, Duplicate, and you can see your shortcut there. So I'm going to duplicate these pieces with Command D. You know that this has happened because you can see the new pieces created here inside the hierarchy panel. I'm going to just move these off to the side. Now with all of these selected, I'm going to hold down V for vertex snap, grab this corner vertex and simply snap that into position like so. I'm then going to grab all of these pieces, so all 6 of these now, duplicate again, and move these off to the side, and then snap these into position. So really, this has been a case of duplicating and vertex snapping. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, but for the other side. So I'm going to make a complete corridor by moving the objects on this side to the other side. So I'm going to grab the floor pieces, the wall pieces, and simply move them to the other side to mirror that and create the second side of the corridor. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and created this complete section here, and effectively we have one section for the corridor that we're going to be using. Now really what I want to do is to take this section of the corridor and repeat it quite some way in the distance to create a really long corridor. Now of course we're going to be making an infinite runner, which effectively means that our environment needs to repeat infinitely. And of course, we can't really build an infinite world. We're going to have to simulate or trick the appearance of an infinitude. But in this instance here, I still want to create more sections of our corridor. Now, I could do that by repeating our duplicate technique. For example, I could grab all of the pieces here, this piece, and duplicate them and move them further along here to create a longer corridor. We could do that. Now, I'm not going to do that, and there's a good reason for that, because it can lead to a huge headache later. And let me show you why. Let's imagine that we've put together this section here, but let's take this corner of the floor. I'm going to select that and just move that just slightly off like that. So it's not actually matching up exactly. So then let's say I don't notice that. In this instance, it's really easy to notice, but if you were putting together a more complicated level, it becomes much harder to see when objects don't align exactly. So this is an error or a problem that potentially we could easily miss. Now let's imagine I don't notice it. I'm going to select all of these pieces, duplicate them, move them along, and there we have the next section of our corridor. But then suddenly, oh dear, I notice the problem. Now, if I notice it at this point, I have to correct it in 2 places. And this problem gets potentially worse if we have to duplicate this many more times. We have to start correcting the problem in a load of different places. A much smarter technique is to prevent this problem from even happening at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this second section and delete it from the level completely. So here we have that second section. Actually, I've got to be careful here. I have accidentally deleted the camera. So I'm just going to select the camera inside the scene, which is here, and just move that off a little bit. Grab this area of the level and delete that from the level. So I'm just going to put this piece back into position here and bring it to there to correct that. I'm going to grab this entire section. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating an object that Unity calls a prefab. Now, to get started at creating a prefab, I'm going to first of all create an empty object. We're going to see exactly how prefabs work, but the best way to do that is to see them by example. To get started at creating a prefab, I'm going to create a new empty object, and an empty object really is just this gizmo. It's just a transform component. That is all an empty object is. They're great for acting like folders or containers. So I'm going to grab that empty object and I'm going to position it about here. I can vertex snap it into place. So I'm going to choose V and left click to drag it to here. And I'm going to name this corridor. It's already snapped into place. I'm then going to grab all the remaining items that are part of the corridor. So all of those different mesh pieces that you can see selected here inside the hierarchy panel. I'm going to drag and drop them all together as a group to the corridor object. Now when I do that, actually I just missed my target there. Grab and drag and drop it so that the corridor object is highlighted like so, and then release my mouse. When I do that, you know it happens successfully because to the left hand side of the corridor object you'll see this twirly icon. It can fold up and be expanded. And in fact I can select just the parent object, just the corridor empty object, and move that around, and all of the child objects, these objects here, will move with it. So it becomes like a container or a handle that allows us to move objects around the level. So that is step one, to group all of your objects under a single parent. That's step one. Next, I'm going to go to the Assets folder and right click and choose Create, and then choose Folder to create a new folder. And I'm going to name this Prefabs and double click on that folder to go inside the folder. I'm going to select our corridor object, that is the parent object, the root object of that prefab, and drag and drop that into the Prefabs folder. Now, when I've done this, you'll notice that it now creates a new asset, a new kind of object inside the project panel. And you can see inside the inspector here that actually, yeah, it's looking pretty good. This is the prefab we created. Now, what's really neat about this is we can drag and drop this into the level as many times as we want, like so. I'm going to duplicate that again, like this. Now, if I want to make a change, for example, let's say I grab this object here and I grab this floor piece and I move that out just a little bit like that. If I wanted the others to change alongside it, that's really easy to do. I'm going to grab the corridor section here and just drag and drop it back over to that, and you'll see that all of the others have now changed with it. I haven't needed to update them all. I can simply work on one of them and the changes are propagated to all of the other pieces. This is a really powerful feature. It means you can edit one section of the environment, and wherever that element is duplicated, the changes will all be updated instantly. But of course, I don't really want the floor to be like that, so I'm just going to grab that and move that back into place like this. Grab the corridor again, drag and drop it down to the bottom, and there we have it. All of these other pieces have been updated. Now I'm going to take this corridor, not this one here, and I'm going to snap that, vertex snap it into place here to create a longer corridor section. I'm going to grab the other one here and vertex snap that into place. So that's looking pretty good. Let's just check that here because I'm not totally convinced that that is correct. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So we have that here. I'm going to grab the next corridor section, duplicate that, and in this time here, you'll notice that the prefab objects are highlighted in blue inside the hierarchy panel. When you duplicate a prefab, as I just did there, that is the same thing as dragging and dropping the prefab into the level, meaning that if the change happens here, it's still going to be propagated to this object. So long as it appears in blue, it's using the prefab system. I'm going to grab that object, snap that into place about here. So I've created a pretty long corridor. I may have to come back and in fact make that a little bit longer still, but I'm going to leave it at this length for now. Now the next thing you'll notice that Unity is doing is it's calculating the lighting. You can see from the bottom right hand side that once again it's calculating the lighting automatically because I have that auto generate activated. Now here is where I want to start to think seriously about the lighting of this level. This is going to be an interior environment. It's not somewhere outside. It's not even on Earth. It's in a space station, so it could be on a completely different planet. It could be in deep space somewhere. So one thing we really don't want is we don't want this entire big blue sky, this kind of Mediterranean feel. We really don't want that. I want to remove the sky from the level completely. So I'm going to do this by using the lighting tab. We visited the lighting tab before. I accessed that by choosing Window, Rendering, and then Lighting Settings. It's over here, docked in the Object Inspector. Now, this tab is something of a mess. It really is easy to tweak some settings here and to kind of mess up the lighting for your level. We really don't want to do that, but thankfully for our case, we only need to tweak a few settings. So the first thing that I want to do is to completely remove the sky for the environment. To do that, I'm going to scroll to the very top of the lighting tab here. So I'm on the lighting tab in the scene section, and under the skybox material, this entire sky here is called the skybox, and it's called a skybox because really it's a cube that's positioned inside the level. We're inside this giant cube, and each and every one of the faces of that cube have a material assigned to it to make it look like we're surrounded by a sky. So I'm going to grab the skybox material, click in the swatch here, and then simply choose None. Now that will completely remove the sky, but it's still pumping this kind of mid-gray material or this mid-gray lighting throughout the level. You can see that in the background here as well. This is controlled by the ambient color swatch here. So I'm going to grab that ambient color swatch. It allows me to pick a color, and I'm simply going to set it to black to completely remove all the lighting from the level. Now we also have the ability to set the sun source, that is the main light in the scene that's going to represent the sunlight. Now in this case, I really don't want that either, so I'm going to grab the sun source, and I'm going to choose that to None. I'm going to select that to None, and I'm going to select the directional light in the scene, and I'm going to delete it completely to remove all the basic lighting from the level completely. In fact, the only lighting that we still have inside this level is the illumination that is coming from the emissive materials, that is light built into these meshes to shine illumination into the level. So that's looking pretty good. The other thing that I want to do, however, is scroll down even further here to this section here in the light mapping settings. Down here for the section that says light map resolution, this allows us to control the quality of our lighting, and by default for a scene of this nature, this is way too high. 40 texels per unit simply means that for every meter in the level there's going to be 40 pixels of texture space. Unity is going to reserve aside in the background to calculate our scene lighting. I'm going to reduce this way down to about 4. This is really going to improve also the amount of time that Unity takes to calculate the lighting in our level. Already you can see that progress bar, it really is changing dramatically already. Look how quickly that is changing. And in fact, in no time at all, Unity is going to calculate the illumination for our level. So basically, we've managed to eradicate the sky, the main light from the level, and we've increased or improved the texture baking settings for the lighting of this scene. I'm going to go ahead and allow that to continue baking. But the next thing that I want to do for our level now is I want to begin adding lights to this scene so that we can create our own illumination. We've got this default illumination here, but I want to add some lights of my own. Okay, so we've created our environment with this kind of default emissive lighting coming from the geometry here. Now I'm going to add our own custom lighting. One way that we could do that is by using the menu here and choosing Game Object, Light, and then choosing the light type we want to add. And for an interior environment like this, we'd be looking at a light like a point light or a spotlight probably. But it turns out that our barking dog 3D assets here comes to the rescue, because when we take a look at the prefabs folder, they actually provide an asset for us that contains a light. Not only does it contain a light, but it contains the actual mesh that we can attach to the ceiling here to cast illumination into the scene. All I need to do is drag and drop the asset into the level. You can see the effect this is already having just by having added that mesh. The first thing I want to do is to kind of bring this ceiling light into place at the center of the ceiling. And for me, that's about here. So I'm going to grab the ceiling light here and simply snap that into position. Now, there are two things that I don't like about this light. One is that it's casting this kind of purple illumination into the level. And two, if I expand the light, you can see that it says we have a spotlight here, but actually it's a point light. I can tell that because one, we have a spherical radius, and that really isn't how a spotlight works. A spotlight uses a cone and not a sphere. And two, if I go to the inspector, I can see here that it even says overtly point light. So I'm going to change this from a point light to a spotlight here. And immediately we can see the cone, but by default, this is way too wide. I'm going to narrow the cone by moving to these dotted handles along the circumference of the cone and click and drag those inwards here. So that works. I'm also going to grab the center point, which allows us to control the height of that cone to bring the cone to maybe somewhere around here. Let's widen it just a little bit more and bring it slightly further up in the scene. I'm going to move over to the object inspector and increase the intensity of the light and increase the intensity of the indirect illumination as well. And I'm going to go over here to the color section and change the color of the light. And I'm going to use a slightly cooler but paler blue, maybe something kind of like this here, to add a slightly cooler shade. And I think that's looking pretty good, at least for this section of the environment. So I'm going to grab that spotlight. The next thing that I want to do is I don't really want this to be casting shadows. I'm going to completely deactivate shadow casting for this light completely. This is going to help us, one, improve performance, and it's going to make it a lot easier to illuminate moving objects. Generally, if you have a light inside Unity and you're always looking for a way to improve the performance of your game, the way it runs on a mobile device compared to a desktop device, one of the first things you should always check to see is, do I have a ton of lights that are casting shadows, and do they really need to be casting shadows? Very often the answer is no, and in those cases simply change the shadow type to no shadows. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now I want to effectively duplicate this light in each of the prefab sections leading further along the corridor. So to do that, I need to choose my corridor section, which is this one here. I'm going to drag and drop the light as a child of that object here, go back to my prefabs folder, drag and drop my corridor to overwrite that prefab, and now notice all the other prefab sections have the lighting in this level. So now we've created a complete section of the environment with all these different lights. That is looking pretty good. The next thing that I'm going to do now is just wait for the light baking to complete, and that actually shouldn't take too long at all. And ta-da, there we have the complete lighting configuration for our environment. All of this is looking pretty good. We've managed to create a complete corridor section. Now at some point later in this course, I may come back to increase the length of the corridor section, but we've seen now how easy that is. We just have to grab a corridor section, Control D or Command D to duplicate that, and then simply to vertex snap that towards the end. There are some other tweaks to lighting that we are going to perform later as well to improve the rendering of moving objects like the player character, but we'll cross that bridge, or we'll fall off that bridge when we come to it. We're at a great point now. We've created and established the foundation for our corridor level. Of course, the illusion of an infinite runner is this is going to repeat infinitely. We'll see in a later video how to do that. So on reaching this point, we've now created a fundamental structure for our level. In the next movie, we're going to take a look at adding a character for the player. So thank you for watching. I've been Alan Thorn, and this has been BeIndie.biz. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and to subscribe to this series so you can get notified when new items are released for this series in creating an infinite runner. Thank you for watching.